Welcome to Todd Talks here at the American Sign Museum. I happen to be Todd, and the founder of the museum. Actually, our signs come from all across the country, but tonight we're going to highlight local signs, and particularly the stories behind them. When we have signs, sometimes if we purchase them, we don't really know that much about the sign, but if we get the sign from the original business identified, or especially when it's local, then we may know the story. We probably know the business owner, the family, the 3 generations of family that operated that business. If you know it, since you guys are from Cincinnati, and if you know anything about that particular business and want to add that in, please speak up, because we don't know everything, and that'll just make our tours even better next time with the information there. Or if you have questions, anytime throughout, fire away. Questions are welcome, and we'll try to answer as best we can. If we don't know the answer, we can find out for you. So, tonight we're going to talk about local signs of Cincinnati, and we thought we'd start with a very famous sign, well-known American icon. Big Boy. Okay. You've probably seen the Big Boys if you're around, even if you're not from Cincinnati originally, and you've seen Big Boys across the country. This happens to be a local Big Boy. Frisch's is the local franchise. It goes roughly north to Columbus, east to Wheeling, south to Lexington and Louisville, and over into Indiana. The Elias brothers in Detroit actually own the Big Boy name, and throughout the last 30, 40 years, they've sold regional franchises, okay? So every franchise has a different name. In particular, probably the most famous franchise was Shoney's in the Southeast. Shoney's Big Boy. Now that franchise no longer exists, so they can't use the Big Boy logo anymore. They've got a little bear they use. California is another one, pretty well known, Bob's Big Boy. But there are other regional ones. Up north, actually in Michigan, since the Elias brothers are in Detroit, you see Elias brothers. Manners is in Cleveland. I know Kips is Oklahoma, Iowa, Kansas, that part of the country. So you see Big Boys all around the country, but they vary a bit, okay? This happens to be, again, the local Frisch's. Now this is an older version. If you want to walk around this side, I want to point out a few things. It's a 60s version. Still has the 3-dimensional slingshot in his back pocket, which is pretty fun. Later on, they simplified the mold and they made the slingshot embossed into his pants, more like a bump as opposed to a full 3D. The ones they make now doesn't have a slingshot at all. It's politically incorrect. Still get to have Game Boys with all these violent things going on, but you can't have a slingshot in your boy's back pocket, go figure. A couple of other things have changed. The older version had the stripes in the pants. That's since been changed to checks. They also, this has the saddle shoes. Saddle shoes are pretty much out of fashion these days, except for maybe golf shoes. So now they're painted solid black or solid brown. His hair is no longer red. It's brown or black. The thinking is that, or was, that a little boy with red hair is much more mischievous than a little boy with black or brown hair, and they didn't want a mischievous little boy representing their restaurant, so then they changed the hair. And lastly, perhaps maybe most importantly, the Big Boys are not quite as well fed as this Big Boy, because now it's not politically correct to be so well fed. So this begins our tour of Signs of Cincinnati. We actually have a whole section of the museum where we highlight Signs of Cincinnati, and that's our area where we hold events, weddings, bar mitzvahs, birthday parties, anniversaries. So we're going to walk over to that section and go through some of those signs. All the Signs of Cincinnati. Maybe we'll start down at the very end here. Some are more well known than others. It also depends upon which side of town you're from, east, west, or north. Wilson's Art Store was a chain here in Cincinnati. This particular sign was at the old Kenwood Mall, which is across from what is now the Kenwood Town Center. And if you're old enough to remember, this was right next to the Thriftway, which kind of anchored the west end of the shopping center. Kroger's, this sign's probably dates from the mid to late 1950s. It's porcelain enamel with neon. We got this from a guy named Vince Clusty, who at the time was working for Lackner Signs. He's since started his own company, Clusty Sign Associates. But he doesn't remember where he got this from, but it's definitely a sign that was taken down in Cincinnati. And since it's an older sign, it's probably not one of the ones out in the burbs. Probably more towards downtown, since it is from the 50s. Took a little bit of liberties with this beautiful beer sign. This is actually from Covington, Kentucky. City Hall Cafe. It was right close to City Hall. The family that owned the City Hall Cafe, some of the descendants of the original family that owned it, were here one time, and they actually had a black and white Polaroid of this, which we have. It's kind of a poor quality shot. It didn't really, the sign itself is a small speck in the picture, but at least we've got a little bit of documentation. Wagon Wheel has quite a story. We're from the west side. You might know the Wagon Wheel Cafe. It was at Bridgetown Road. It actually it dates back to the 1880s when this was a carriage stop, when Bridgetown Road was out from the city, probably the last stop before you got into downtown Cincinnati. The last family to own this bar were the Wegman family. Carol Wegman was probably what you might call the matriarch of the family business. The city of Cincinnati wanted to widen the intersection where this was, so they took the property eminent domain, tore down the building, and everybody was concerned about the sign. Now, because the Wagon Wheel Cafe had such a history, as I said, going back to the 1880s, a writer at the Inquirer kind of wrote a whole history of the Wagon Wheel Cafe and talked to Carol, and the sign came up in the conversation in the interview, and he said, well, what's going to happen to this sign? She goes, well, I really don't know. There's a lot of people that want to buy the sign, put it in their man cave, squirrel it away in their barn, whatever. She goes, I really don't know what to do with it. And the reporter happened to have done some pieces on the sign museum and said, I don't know if you know it, but there's actually a sign museum in the city of Cincinnati. And she, her kind of eyes perked up and, her ears perked up, and she said, wow, can you put me in touch with them? So I went over to meet her, and she was really glad to have the sign here out in the public where everybody could see it, as opposed to being squirreled away in someone's basement. Now, the story gets a little bit richer, because when we got the sign, some of the neon wasn't working. It had been broken when it was taken down. So we brought the sign here. We started to restore the neon, and Tom Wortman, who runs Neon Works, our in-house neon shop, said, hey, Todd, this sign had a flasher on it. And what he meant by that is, as you see right now, the spokes of the wheel, what we call animated, they're flashing on and off as if the wheel was turning. He said, would you want to put the flasher back, because it was not working. It had ceased working, and whatever sign company was supposed to maintain that sign just kind of wired around it. So we put the flasher back on, and when Carol came down to see the sign before we restored it, I told her, I said, Carol, I don't know if you knew, but this sign used to be animated. She goes, well, what do you mean? And then I told her it meant that the spokes flashed on and off as if the wheel was turning. She goes, well, you know what? I think you're right. I think I kind of remember that. I said, well, I know I'm right, because there's an old flasher in there that quit working. And then she thought it would be a good idea to buy a new flasher, put it in there, and make it animated once again. Now, we don't like to repaint signs. If I unplug this quickly, you can't really see the distressed paint. But when I unplug it and the neon off, you kind of see how rough that is. But to us, we call that patina. We would never repaint this sign because the signs are inside. The weathering is not going to get any worse, and to us, that's part of the sign story. Yeah. So again, this is kind of a fun sign, particularly because it's animated, because we know so much about it. The Suiters Art Store, if you know, over the Rhine, has been redeveloped, obviously. Suiters has been downtown since I think the late 40s. This sign dates to then. They had restored the neon on the sign several times, maybe more than several times over the years, and back then Over the Rhine was not what it is now, so it kept getting broken. So finally they just quit restoring it. They were tired of paying the repair bills, and it kind of sat. It was still on the building projecting over the sidewalk, but because it hadn't been neon hadn't been maintained, the pole jutting off from the building was kind of like starting to fall down. It was in danger, shall we say. We found out about that. We asked them if we could have the sign, and they were pleased that we had the sign. We brought it here. We restored the neon, put it back up. There's a sign painter in Cincinnati, pretty well known, named Dauber. He goes by the name Dauber. That's like his street name. He does a lot of work for WEBN. He's a pinstriper and a sign painter. Does a lot of Harley tanks and stuff like that. He offered to repaint them a wooden sign in this same kind of Art Deco design. So that's what's projecting off the building. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. Okay. The Provident Bank, that was taken down by a sign company here in Cincinnati. I don't remember who, but that was on Race Street. That's kind of typical 50s construction. The letters themselves, the three-dimensional letters, are stainless steel with neon on top of them. You happen to, if you're in the East, if you're in New York, Philadelphia, New Jersey area, that's a real, that's a type of construction that you often see in signs in the 50s. In fact, we just acquired a sign from Manhattan on 34th Street, same type of construction. But there was some stainless steel here. It was kind of a higher end look. A bank could afford a nice sign. Chevrolet. Now, this was actually not that far from the museum. This was the old Chevrolet plant, or a dealership down on Spring Grove Avenue, Spring Grove and Mitchell. They lost their dealership back in, was it the 90s, I guess, the early 90s, when General Motors closed up some of its less performing dealership. They lost their dealership. It's now Honda, Kia, and Hyundai, but a superior Chevrolet. This sign had been taken down and was in the back. We restored the neon on it. This is also porcelain enamel, probably mid to late 50s. Okay, we've had a lot of people want to come here that are collectors of signs and want to buy this sign. Automobile and gas-related neon porcelain signs are particularly prized and also worth a lot of money. We don't want to sell the sign. Obviously, it's a piece of Cincinnati history. Bud and the Grill is a little bit more obscure. It was in North College Hill. I want to point out something a little bit on the sign. I don't know if you can, if you look at the D in Bud, you'll see a little circle to the upper left of it and then a circle on top of that. Those are where there used to be neon, used to go back into the sign. They're the housing holes, like you see this glass. This is called a housing. It's where the end of the neon goes back into the sign and they're wired together inside in a series. So that sign originally said something else, and the housing holes are placed toward the end of a letter, like you'll see on this L right here. It comes over here, goes all the way over here, and a T here. So I know that sign originally said something else. I don't know what. I could maybe imagine. I would be taking a wild guess, basically. But it wasn't unusual for a sign company to, let's say, recycle a sign and then plug the housing holes that were no longer needed. But that's a pretty good example. North College Hill. Dawn Ray Radio and TV is one of our more recent acquisitions. We probably got that about a year ago. It was on a storefront in Chevy. Called a spinner clock, that little part in the middle. This is also late 50s probably. Pretty well known if you're from the west side, particularly Westwood, was Havig's. Havig's was on Harrison Avenue in Westwood. There's actually a wine store next to it, I think called the Window Garden or something like that. Very well known sign. It was made by the Lackner Company, which was a pretty famous sign company in Cincinnati. It no longer exists as Lackner Sign itself. Lackner was acquired by Whole House Sign, another old line sign company in Cincinnati, so it's now Whole House Lackner. But Lackner goes back to the 20s, and they were known for making a lot of neon clocks and a lot of smaller neon signs. We call pointed purpose signs, the signs you might see in the window on our countertop store. A very fun sign, very 50s-ish animation with the wine glass or champagne glass spilling down the side of it. Now we take it, I told you, we took a couple liberties. It was beautiful, not exactly from Cincinnati, we call it Greater Cincinnati. The GE sign actually came from a good friend of the museum's, Bruce Suba, who's a neon tube vendor actually in Scotts Valley, California. He gave us this sign, but we didn't have anything from General Electric, so we're pretending that came from Cincinnati because General Electric is certainly a big name, producing engines, jet engines out of Edenville. So a little bit of liberty there. Trivets, I'm pretty sure that was decades before your time. It was on Race Street. It was maybe what you might call like a head shop, but it was more than that. Besides pipes and all of that, it had bell bottoms. It had a whole room called the blacklight room where they had blacklight posters, and it was 2 floors. Actually, the second floor of it was kind of an antique store, and they had all the wax figures of all the presidents up through LBJ. Not too many people were allowed to go up there, but bands that wanted to do a 60s look would come here. It's one of the few places you could still find bell bottoms and blacklight posters and anything related to the 60s, shall we say. Okay. So that's a pretty fun sign. There's a lot of history. If you look that up on the internet, there's probably some really neat stories, but probably some unpublished stories that are even more fun. We'll leave that one alone. Wizard Records, that's actually not that old of a sign. It's probably late 80s. It was up on Short Vine, up by UC, with that little section of Vine Street we call Short Vine. There was a side street there. Kind of a fun sign with a wizard. Very nice little sign. Multicolored. It's hard for us to keep that working, his little magic wand where he's playing wizard. This sign here is for sure late 50s. Victor Sino's Pizza King. Pizza King was actually headquartered in Dayton, and there were maybe 100, 120 stores in this area at its height. It was so popular they actually had a whole franchise down in the Florida, Miami, Lauderdale area at its height again. There's still one out, I think, on Route 4 in Fairfield, but they were known for the little square. Instead of cutting it in pie slices, they had a little square for pizza. I'm told that it was pretty good pizza. This one happened to be from the Finneytown area, just almost at the corner of Daly and Gallup Road, Finneytown. And last but not least, here we've got the pop sign. Does anybody know what this is from? Cincinnati Box, it was at the Symphony. They used to have it on the stage, behind the stage at Music Hall when the Symphony played. And when they went to Riverbend area and played, they would actually take the sign with them. It's kind of a crudely made sign. The story I got, it was made by their maintenance man. This is actually just cut out of plywood. I mean, even though it's a crude sign, I have to applaud his effort for never having made a sign. The giant light bulbs, you can kind of see when he was cutting it out of the plywood, there's one section where instead of a curve, it's almost straight because he made the letter, he didn't plan well for the letter, he had to make it, I think it's like right here. See, this is like the edge of the plane. This ought to have a little bit more curve to it. Also, kind of right here, it looks like it should be a little bit more drop, the curve should drop, but still, pretty good effort for a maintenance man. If you look at it closely, they actually, when they painted, they sprinkled glitter on it. Like when you're a little kid and you make Valentine's, you know, you put that glitter. It doesn't really do anything, but I thought that they thought it might make it sparkle more. Anyways, valiant effort, good thinking, but it doesn't quite work. When they would take it to Riverbend, this, you can see this piece comes off, and that extension of the P, the big curve, comes off as well. So a little tough to transport, but apparently they did. When we hung it, we wanted to make it level, but we couldn't find exactly what reference point to make it level, so we kept playing with it. I don't know if we got it right or not. We tried to use the metal bars that it's mounted to make it straight, but they're a little off too. So if it's a little crooked, you know, get using the eye of the beholder. Level isn't the eye of the beholder. So, anyways, it's a nice place here. They've got a new sign that's more modern technology, all LEDs and can change colors. But we like this sign better. More endearing, since it was made by the maintenance man. Now we've got a couple more signs, 3 or 4 more signs that actually aren't in the Cincinnati area. And a couple of those have some pretty good stories too, so I thought I'd point those out. Anybody have any questions that they want to ask, or don't be bashful? We opened here in June 2012, so we're coming up on our 10th anniversary next year. We're about eight months away, or what is that, 8 or 9 months away. This sign here is the one I want to talk about, the Georgian's Pizza. Now, I don't know if you know the Clifton area on McMillan, there's a Max Pizza. It's in that little block between Clifton Avenue that goes down the hill and Clifton Avenue that's in front of Hughes High School. It kind of jumps over a block. Max Pizza is right in that section. This sign was originally in a parking lot for Max Pizza before Mac bought it and changed it to Max Pizza. If you turn down Clifton, start going down the hill, there's a parking lot behind all those storefronts, and that's where this sign was. Now, I've talked to Mac about it, since the name had changed, he didn't really need the sign anymore, and I thought it'd be a nice addition to the museum. When we got the sign down, I couldn't tell when it was up in the air, but when we got the sign down, that black and white panel that says Georgian's, I could see that it had been screwed into the sign, which tells me there's probably something behind that. So we pulled the neon off, took out the screws and pulled the panel off, and lo and behold, underneath that, this is what it said.
Oh, wow.
It said Papadinos. I don't know if you were a frequenter of Clifton, but there was a Papadinos catty corner from Hughes High School. That was a plastic sign. That was the second location of Papadinos. This was in the parking lot from the original location of Papadinos, which is where Max Pizza was. So what's the deal with the Georgians? So, don't have all this story completely clear because there's family involved, which often kind of clouds the story. There's several opinions about how this went down, but there were two family members. I don't know if it was an uncle and a nephew, a father and son, two brothers, who owned the original pizza place where Max is, the original Papadinos. At some point, they had a falling out. The compromise was that one of the family members could keep the original location, but had to change the name. The other one could reopen with the original name, so he kind of took an in-your-face attitude and opened up around the corner, and that's the one that was at Hughes, catty corner from Hughes High School. So wrapped up in this, just this innocent sign here, is a whole history of family squabbles. So that's particularly, at least to us, is kind of fun. I'm not so sure it's fun for the family, but the whole story right here in the sign. Now we're happy to be standing in front of another Cincinnati one-time landmark. This is pronounced Ross. It's German. It's not R-O-H'-S. This was on Vine Street, about the 1500 block, right around where the Kroger's, the old Kroger's was, and not that, a few doorsteps, a few doors from Suter's. This was obviously a hardware store. It had closed down in that redevelopment that was going on in Over the Rhine about 8 to 10 years ago. So we wanted the Ross letters. We thought they were kind of cool. Porcelain enamel with a neon mounted on it. Then we found out that they were going to tear off these porcelain enamel panels. These are all porcelain enamel. Porcelain enamel is that finish on your bathtub or your stove. If you look in your grandma's kitchen, she probably had pots and pans that were white with a ring, a red ring or a black ring. That's also porcelain enamel. A lot of signs I mentioned before are made out of porcelain enamel. It holds up very well in the weather. So anyways, this hardware store, which dates to the 30s, at some point was remodeled, probably in the late 40s, and clad with these porcelain enamel panels. So we found out that the guys that were going to redevelop this into a wine store were going to remove the panels and scrap them. So we asked them if we could have them. So we documented the buildings, took the panels one by one, and recreated the Ross hardware store almost exactly the way it originally was. And then we even got the original front door, complete with patina, as it were, the bent railing and the paint and all that. Now it did have, when we got it, it had vinyl lettering on the window, which is more of an 80s, 90s thing, so that wasn't going to work for us. So the sign painters who came here and created all these faux storefronts scraped the vinyl off and then re-lettered it in a late 40s typeface to make it fit the rest of the building. There's one little piece of this story. When we took down the panels, it took us a couple truckloads to bring them back here. And the one time we got back about 9 o'clock at night, a little tired from taking them down, kind of arduous task up there in the ladders. These things are kind of heavy, at least the bigger ones. We happened to leave 3 of the panels out on our loading dock and went home for the night. And we came back and we kind of pieced this back together. We realized we were missing 3 panels. And then one of the crew, I don't know if it's me or one of the other guys, goes, "Oh no, remember we left them on the loading dock." Well, scrappers came that night and stole them. Wow. So we had to replicate 3 of the panels and create to make them in porcelain enamel would have been really expensive. They don't really do porcelain enamel anymore. So our welder created the panels and then actually got that kind of textured look on the panels. So you'd be a little hard pressed to find the 3 that we actually had to make to fit the building. So that's got quite a story with it too. Now there's one more sign in here I want to talk about. It's over in the other section of the museum if you want to follow me over there. Another sign with a bit of history that's kind of fun. It's referred to as the Fergie sign. This was for a car wash. Ferguson Car Wash was originally on Ferguson Road in the west side, but later on they opened 4 other car washes. This one happened to be in Norwood. If you go to the Trotta's Pizza on the west side, that was originally a Ferguson Car Wash, and on top of the building is one of these cars. Although it's not working and they've repainted it, it kind of says Trotta's on it. But this sign has quite a history. Once they closed down the Ferguson Car Wash in Norwood where it had been, the sign, I'm not sure where the sign was in the interim, but if you remember Neon's Bar down on Main Street, I think it was that 15th Ave or 14th Ave, I can't remember. Jerry Carter had Neon's. He had this on the roof of the bar. It was hard to see. You had to get back pretty far. It's like the 3rd floor roof. When he closed that down, an antique dealer from out in Wyoming, Ohio, bought the sign, kept it a while, and then he got tired of it. And there's a sign company in Williamsburg, Ohio called Dualite. They found out about the sign. They bought the sign from the antique dealer and donated it to the museum. So now it's here where it should be as far as I can see. This is a really good example of what we call animated neon. And by that, like we saw on the spokes of the wagon wheel, it looks like the wheels are moving. There's actually 3 layers of neon, 3 circles stacked on top of each other, but positioned off center. So they flash on and off, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, creating the effect that the wheels are moving. And we're standing pretty close to that. It works much better if you're standing back 50, 100 feet. That's where it's meant to be seen. It pulls that motion effect off much better. Now you see the 3 stars, I'm going to call them stars now. Those are kind of flashing on and off. You kind of wonder what's the deal with those. Well, those are sparkles. The car is sparkling clean, having just come out of the car wash. So I think this is a really fun sign. A lot of colors too. So we're really glad to do signs here. Got one more sign in here. I don't know a whole lot of history about it. If you look here, this kind of it gives itself away. Cincinnati Barber College. This is the late 50s sign. There was a kind of an era in the late 50s where a lot of the plastic signs had like balls on them. If you go downtown on Vine Street, there's a building. It's what's the waffle? The Belgian? What's the?
Taste of Belgium.
The what? The Belgian waffle place, whatever that is. That business, I think it's that business, has a sign with kind of like a ball on it. And you're kind of going, what's going on with that design? That was a 50s thing. I think it's part of that space age era. But that sign has 3 poles coming up at a different height with 3 balls on it. And it's got a sign face that used to rotate. It doesn't rotate right now. But the same era as the sign. This was found in the basement of a building in OTR when it was being redeveloped. We got word about it. They certainly, I think 3CDC called us. They didn't want this sign. It's pretty funky sign, but that's kind of that 50s, kind of less costly, down and dirty type plastic sign look with the flashing on and off. Probably wouldn't be acceptable with the current sign. So that's really most of the signs that we have on display. But tonight, as our guest here for Todd Talks, you get a special treat. We're going to take you back in our warehouse section and show you a number of other Cincinnati signs. These are not lit. We don't have a lot of electrical back there. We tore all that out when we were working on that on the warehouse. There used to be a lot of office spaces. So if you'd like to, we're going to go back there into our warehouse and see some of these other signs. Obviously upside down. There's a whole new bunch of overpasses out at the Elberon Warsaw when you go up to the west, up to Price Hill. There's they're kind of going like this. Underneath that is a waterworks department, new offices, and this sign was on that property on a chain of buildings that they tore down. When we got the sign, it was in that category which we call basket case. It was really rusted out. It's obviously upside down, but this sheet metal that you see right here was gone. There's actually angle iron inside the sign that's kind of its structure, like the skeleton of the sign. A lot of that was gone. So we had to actually pull this porcelain face off to have access into the inside of the sign. And we had to splice in new angle iron to make it structurally sound. But what we did is, normally when you make signs now, they would make this out of aluminum. We didn't want to have this nice shiny aluminum onto this vintage sign. So we actually used rusted metal to kind of keep that original look of the sign. This bottom panel, which this would be the bottom of the sign, you can see it was lettered at least twice, maybe even 3 times. It's kind of hard to tell. We call this a privilege panel on a sign. So this part of the main sign was what we call a production sign. They mass produced that, and then they would customize it for the local dealer by adding this special privilege panel. It's much like you see a corner grocery store has a big Pepsi sign, and underneath it says Fred's Grocery. That Fred's Grocery is the privilege panel. So that's a really good example of that. Now this is one that we fixed up. Obviously we had to restore all the neon. We've had this other sign here, and I want to show you, this is kind of a before and after. If you want to come down here and look. This was in the Carthage area on Vine Street. This is kind of how that one there looked. All this, so this is the bottom of the sign. Obviously it's upside down. This had all rusted away. This angle iron here, if you look, I can even move this. It's structurally unsound. This needs to get the same kind of restoration that one has. So this sign, this was the bottom. This tower here fit in right there. So it was kind of like an upside down L, if you will. We just made the neon for this, and it's a pretty neat sign. It's really that late 40s kind of stylized Art Deco look, but made by, it was Elgin Watch would have these made for their dealers, and once again it could be customized for the local dealer. In this case, quite a privilege panel, Karl Mach, but this part of the sign was the production part. If that makes sense, okay? So we're working on that one. We've got a few other signs back here. Here, McMahon's, with a clothing store. There's a boutique hotel. This is about Race and 7th or Race and 8th. It was on that corner, okay? And then this RCA sign down here, if you want to take a look at this real quick. This is what we call an NOS sign, new old stock. So it had never been installed. The guy that had it still had the original crate, but it had sat in his basement and got wet, so the crate was kind of falling apart. But the sign's in perfect condition. It's a good example of probably early mid-60s plastic. Kind of funky to our taste now, but right at that point it was very much in keeping with design for that time. And this was at a Swallens. The Swallens, and there was a Swallens down on Red Bank Road, which was kind of a discount store. The guy started off selling appliances out of his garage, and it grew into a whole store. So it's kind of neat to have that memory of Swallens. It's gone. Swallens has been gone for a number of years. Kentucky. This was an ice business where they used to make blocks of ice. There were 3 brothers that owned this. One of the brothers had been not in great health, so the 2 other brothers were running it, and they were in their late 60s, and they were open every single day of the week, and they were kind of tired of working it themselves, so they closed up. I had eyed this sign for a number of years, and we kind of approached them. There was a big article, kind of like the Wagon Wheel in the Inquirer, about the long history of the family business, and that's how I knew that they unfortunately closed down. So we went over and met the brothers, and they were really happy that the sign came here. There you go. There's a couple signs here. Izzy's is the famous corned beef. A sign company brought this to us. They had taken it down. I don't know the origin of this particular sign because it has the anniversary. It might have been a special sign just made for that. 100 years is quite an accomplishment, so it might have been made just for that. Now this Subway sign, I was talking about Max Pizza up there on McMillan. This was about 2 doors west. There used to be a Subway up there. I think it's a Thai restaurant now. There's a little alley right next to it. To me, it's an interesting sign because Subway, as being a franchise, usually wants to maintain its logo, which means they tell you what the sign's going to look like, and those are all made production style by probably regional sign companies. I've never seen a Subway sign that looks like this. I don't know, but I'm taking a guess that in order to put a neon sign in Clifton, that the building department or the historic preservation people or somebody in the city asked them, recommended, told them, whatever, that it had to have a period look. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking that's what happened because, again, I've never seen a neon Subway sign in that particular shape. So somewhat of an interesting story there. Isidore's happened to be a Camp Washington, was a Camp Washington business right down on the corner at Coleraine and Hopple, across from one of our favorite chili places, our favorite chili place, Camp Washington Chili. So it was right across the street. There's a long history of that. I read on the website. Isidore's very famous for their buffet. Okay. One more sign, again, that kind of poetic license about Cincinnati, Turfway Park, which is being redone. This is a pretty modern sign. It did have light bulbs chasing it, and you can see all the way around, kind of flashing like some of the signs you saw over on the other side. And probably the last sign, it's a little tough to see, is this sign over here. The one laying on its side, the green one. Might want to come in here and look. Probably a good view right here. It says East End Cafe. It was down on Eastern Avenue, and you see at the bottom it says Stag Only. The sign had been repainted a number of times, and when we got the sign, it said like established 1886, which I don't think was true. It's just something they put up there to make it look older. We acquired the sign. The building actually burned down suspiciously. We got the sign before it burned down. We scraped it down to bare metal to figure out the graphics, because as it was repainted, it got sloppier and sloppier about the various lines and the letters. Like I think house painters repainted it, not sign painters. So we actually scraped it down to bare metal and uncovered the original graphics and enough specks of paint to be able to match the colors. And if you look at that, that is like an early 30s color, Art Deco color combination. The sign, like you saw the sign down there, I talked about that, we restored where we replaced the metal. Water tends to collect in the bottom of a sign cabinet, which makes sense. It's almost like a pool, and it pools down there and rusts out the bottom. The same thing had happened to this sign. It was in pretty rough shape. We were approached by a movie production company, an LA production company, that was doing a movie called Detroit. It aired, or it was debuted about 3 years ago, I know, in the summer. Didn't last very long, like 3 months maybe. But it was about the riots in Detroit in 1967. So this LA production company came to us and said, we want to rent some signs. We're trying to create, you know, a look of 67, which means that they would have signs from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. They would have some neon, some plastic. So they could come here and kind of one-stop shop and hit all the areas that they needed to hit. And they really liked this sign. So they paid us to restore the sign so we could rent it to them.
Wow.
And I'd like to do that a lot more often.
Yeah.
Talk about a win-win situation. That's a win-win situation. So that completes our tour of most of our Cincinnati signs. There's a few more squirreled away behind things. But we really appreciate you coming out tonight. You can watch for this on YouTube.
Thank you very much.
No, you're welcome.
Very cool.